Winter didn't used to be a season. It used to be a test that killed the weak, the unlucky, and sometimes the innocent. For tens of thousands of years, before heaters, before grocery stores, before down jackets, humans faced winter with nothing but bone, fire, and desperation. And some of the methods they used to survive were so brutal, so dark, that most people today would rather not know they existed. But you're still here, so let's talk about them. In the coldest reaches of the Arctic, some hunter-gatherer groups didn't have time to build shelter before a storm hit. So they improvised, using the body of a freshly killed animal, like a musk ox or a seal, as an emergency shelter. They'd gut the animal, empty it out, and climb inside the carcass itself. The thick fur and fat layer trapped body heat far better than any tent could. It was gruesome. It smelled unbearable. But it kept people alive through nights that would have otherwise frozen them solid. Modern diets treat fat like the enemy. Ancient winter survival flipped that completely. In extreme cold, the human body burns through carbohydrates almost instantly, but fat burns slow and steady, like a furnace that doesn't go out. Arctic peoples, like early Inuit communities, relied heavily on raw blubber and organ meat, sometimes eaten frozen straight off the animal, because cooking it would have wasted precious fuel. The taste didn't matter. Survival did. If a storm caught someone in the open with no shelter, digging a snow cave could be a death sentence in itself. It took time and energy they didn't have. So some groups used a faster, darker method, digging a shallow pit in the snow and burying themselves inside it, using their own body heat and the insulating property of snow to survive the night. It looked like being buried alive. In a way, it was. But snow, unlike open air, traps heat. Some travelers who tried to tough it out above ground froze to death within hours. The ones who buried themselves sometimes walked out alive the next morning. When wood ran out, and in the Arctic, wood was often non-existent for hundreds of miles, people burned whatever they had. Animal fat was the most common fuel, but in true desperation, some groups burned bones themselves, since bone marrow is flammable when dried and rendered. Every part of an animal had a use. Nothing was wasted, because wasting anything in winter wasn't wasteful. It was suicidal. This is the part of history that's uncomfortable to say out loud, but it's real, and it shaped how small nomadic groups survived brutal winters for thousands of years. When food ran critically short, not tight, but critically, mathematically short, to the point where the entire group would starve, some ancient and even some documented historical societies practiced difficult forms of resource rationing. In extreme famine conditions, historical and anthropological records describe groups making devastating decisions about who received food first. Hunters and workers who could still contribute got priority because keeping them alive meant everyone had a chance. In the most extreme, well-documented survival situations in human history, like certain Arctic expeditions and isolated famine winters, there are also grim historical accounts of communities and stranded travelers resorting to consuming the deceased once all other food sources were exhausted, as an absolute last resort to survive. Historians and anthropologists study these events not to shock, but because they reveal just how far the human survival instinct will go when there is truly no other option. It's not something ancient peoples did lightly. It wasn't common. It was the final, unthinkable line, crossed only when every other option had already failed. Frostbite in the ancient world often meant losing fingers, toes, or worse. Without modern medicine, some groups used moss, animal fat, or even warm urine to treat frostbitten skin, based on the belief that warmth and moisture could reverse the damage. Sometimes it worked. Often it didn't, and infection followed. Amputation, using stone tools, no anesthesia, nothing but sheer will, was sometimes the only way to stop it from spreading and killing the whole body. This is the darkest one. In nomadic groups that had to keep moving to find food or escape a storm, there are historical and anthropological accounts, documented among some Arctic and subarctic peoples in extreme circumstances, of elderly members or those too sick to travel choosing to stay behind or being left behind, so the rest of the group could survive and keep moving. In some documented cultural practices, this wasn't seen as cruelty. It was understood as an accepted, almost ritual sacrifice sometimes even requested by the elder themselves, because a group slowed down by someone who couldn't walk meant everyone might die, instead of just one person. It's a devastating piece of history, but it's also a piece of why the human species made it through ice ages that lasted thousands of years. Winter didn't care about mercy, it didn't care about fairness. Every method you just heard, the carcass shelters, the raw fat, the snow graves, the unthinkable last resorts, they all trace back to one single, brutal truth. Humans didn't survive the cold because they were the strongest species on Earth. They survived because they were willing to do whatever it took, even when whatever it took meant crossing lines that we, today, can barely imagine. That's the story of how ancient humans really survived winter. Not with warmth, not with comfort, with the will to see the next sunrise, no matter the cost.